Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University and welcome to vlog 192. How do you know you're at the end of your PhD? What a fascinating suggestion this one is, and it comes from Anna. Hi Anna. Wow, you've worked me hard on this one. This one was intriguing. And as I've always said, beginnings matter, but endings matter a lot more. And how exactly do you know when your PhD has concluded? Well, we know about the beginnings. Everything's fantastic at the beginning. When you start your PhD, you're filled with excitement about research, about discovery. Your PhD supervisor is thrilled and excited. You're both together. This is looking fantastic. This is wonderful. This is great. So the beginnings of PhDs are often incredibly buoyant, exciting, passionate, brilliant. At the end of a PhD, you want to throw your computer out of the window. You'd like to do some serious damage to photocopiers. Emotionally, that happy, joy moment is over, and all those really dreadful emotions, envy, jealousy, anger, resentment, bitterness, all that stuff starts to enter the cauldron of your PhD life. Oh, we're going well. And of course, students are stressed. Supervisors are stressed. And as I always say, the final 3 months before you submit are the worst 3 months of your life. Now that's particularly dreadful for a student, there's no doubt about that. You have one nightmare ending in your life. Most people only do one PhD, and that final 3 months, wow, it's dreadful, and it's just dreadful. Think about it from a supervisor's perspective. We have multiple endings, multiple final 3 months. It's like Groundhog Day in a meth lab. There's nothing positive to say about it except that it's over. And that's why beginnings matter, but endings matter more. So then the problem emerges. How do you know it's actually over? How do you know an ending is actually an ending? Endings do matter because they are pivots of our lives. It's a moment where one reality of who we were ends and another reality emerges, and we transcend into a different way of thinking about ourselves and the world. So I'm not underestimating the importance of endings. Endings are crucial. And what we're going to do in the vlog today is find proxies and strategies to log that ending, to know when the ending is actually an ending, and to let go. Okay. And there is a sizable minority of students who cling on to the PhD. So actually after it's over and everything's fine and it would go through and pass reasonably easily, those students don't let go. And the reason they're not letting go has nothing to do with research or scholarship or the thesis itself, and everything to do with their emotional state. They like who they are as a PhD student and are not prepared for that identity to end. So if you're feeling that a little bit in yourself, let's come up with some proxies today to address that so you can let go. Wow. So Anna, I have taken your question incredibly seriously. The research is very patchy on this, really patchy on this. And so I've used all sorts of stuff from psychology, but also from business and management as well, to put these together with also some doctoral studies. So the problems or the proxies when students don't finish, or they take a long time, or they attrit. Okay, so that's the research literature I've deployed for you, Anna. And I'm going to be focusing on particular areas that are challenging for students. So how do you know it's over in terms of research and reading? How do you know it's over in terms of drafting and editing? And how do you align your emotional, intellectual and professional goals and self to move on to that next stage? Remember too that at the end of your thesis, you're not in a great place to be making any decisions of any kind. You're battling to remember your own name most of the time. You're battling to remember what coffee you like when you're in a coffee shop. So you're not really understanding your own life, your own work. You're not reading your own work properly. And this is, I think, quite important. So what I'm doing is I am giving you those proxies. So when you're going, what's my name? Who am I? Who is this person? What's going on? For those moments where you're completely disoriented, I'm giving you some proxies to go, right, well, okay, let's focus on this. What can I do to understand if this component is over? Okay. And I've got 5 points to work through today, and please disagree with them, agree with them, but just watch them and see if these ideas are useful to you. 1, how do you know it's over? You've answered your research questions. This seems a bit but let me show you how I know it's over when you can answer your research questions in this particular way. So what happens is, how I know it's over is when a student has research questions that are presented in the introduction and they're writing the conclusion. And they resummon their research questions, and they're able to, one at a time, demonstrate how they've answered those questions. So, here's the question, and here are 3-4 paragraphs about how I have answered that question well. This was the literature that I was exploring. This is how I've transcended it. So it's a nice way to package up, if you will, your research in a really precise way. So if you're able to move through those questions and demonstrate to yourself, to your examiners, how you have answered those questions, and then you can align all the filaments of those research questions and show your original contribution to knowledge, that's the ending. So that's why conclusions are so important. Get in there and make the case, don't assume the case. Resummon your questions, show me how you're answering those questions, and then how that feeds into your original contribution to knowledge. If you can do that, if you can write that, that's the research ending. You're done, you're cooked, it's over. 2, this next one is about deadlines. It's also about money. Who knew we'd go there? Right, 2, right at the start, set a date for completion and stick to it. This is particularly important for students on scholarship. Let me tell you why. And this might surprise you, because it surprised the hell out of me. Now, about 1/3 of the PhD students at Flinders University are on a scholarship. That's a living wage, if you will, a stipend. Now, internationally, that's a pretty high figure. I know a lot of our friends around the world, in North America, in England, you'd be a bit amazed that sort of 1/3 of our students are on scholarship, and in fact, for 4 years, they don't pay any fees either. So I can hear people going, screaming around the world. So as you can see, this system, our Australian education system, does support our researchers, I think, very, very well. But let me tell you about that 1/3 of students on scholarship. And let me give you one more data point before I hit that narrative. When I list, as I do on a weekly basis, the students that are over time in the system. In the Australian system, it's students enrolled for over 4 years. So when I pull the list of the students that are over time in any given week, that list of overtimers is dominated by students who formerly held a scholarship. So this is the group of students that the university has supported, Australian taxpayers have supported, and they're over time. Now, I know that seems unbelievably counterintuitive, and for the first year I was seeing this data point emerge week after week. I'd be sort of thinking, what is going on? Well, let me tell you what's going on. Remember, I talk with every single overtime student, so I know the story, and now I know the Propian folktale. I know the structure and strategy of that narrative. So what happens is, a student enrolls in a PhD on scholarship. Now what happens is they're on scholarship and they don't complete as much work as they need to in the first year. And that problem then cascades through the second year and the third year, and perhaps an extension to 3 years and 6 months, which is the maximum for the scholarship. And at 3 years, 6 months, let me tell you what happens, they still haven't finished. So they switch from full-time to part-time. And of course the money's stopped, the scholarship money is stopped, so they're scratching about for part-time work to try and pay their bills. So they're used to focusing on the thesis full-time. Now they're part-time, they haven't had to develop the literacy or the resources to be able to balance all these different areas in their life, which the students not on scholarship had to organise early on, right? So the stress of this change, full-time, part-time, no money, having to make money, oh wow, the stress of that change then creates a cascade of mental health concerns, incredible stress, and they end up in counselling. Okay, so then the problem continues, and they click over 4 years enrolment. They are now over time by any measure, and people around them start to sort of question, can they do it? You know, and then the student themselves starts to panic. You know, can I actually finish? So the self-doubt happens, and wow, it's on for young and old. Now that's actually a pattern. That's actually a narrative. That's what happens with student after student after student, right? So what is happening here is that the students are perhaps so happy with their scholarship that they become complacent, they become satisfied, and they don't do enough work in the first year. As I often say, you've got to hit the ground running in the first year. You've got to work your guts out in the first year, and then you're cool. But if you're sort of going, oh, isn't this nice, I'm on scholarship, isn't this fun to just be doing research that I love? And I understand that, it's very pleasant, but you see what happens, you don't do enough work in the first year because you had money, had scholarship money, and it was cool. And then the money ran out, and it wasn't cool. So that is the reason why we now have milestones at Flinders University. I know universities around the world have this, and this is why people go, why are you telling me what to do? I'll tell you why. It's for you. That's why we have milestones. We go, this is your end date, team. This is the end point. And from that point or node, let's backwardly map milestones so you actually have micro deadlines to get you home. And of course, that's incredibly successful. And that process is called backward mapping. We've done a lot of vlogs on that. So once you've backwardly mapped, you go, right, well, that's when I'm due, and this is the work I have to do to get there, and then you commit to doing that work. Now, if you don't have a date, you don't have milestones, you sort of drift because research is terribly pleasant and you're mixing with interesting, bright people. Life is a joy. But for those of you, us, I was on scholarship too, that have the privilege of a scholarship, your submission date has been given to you. That's the date your scholarship ends. I'm going to say, by the way, for my scholarship, because I came from a tough working class background, it was always going to be, there's the scholarship date that ends, and that's when this thesis is going to be in. And that's exactly what happened in all of my projects, because there was no plan B. And I think perhaps the students are assuming there is a plan B, and there's not. This is your scholarship. This is when the dough ends. Make sure that the work and the research design fits that time frame. So you know when you're going to be finished, because that's the date your scholarship stops. And what I want you to do is plan right from day one and succeed to get yourself to that due date. Now, if you don't, and this is the warning, then it's going to have incredible impacts on your mental health, your well-being, and the lack of money will just cascade after that scholarship concludes. So just a reminder, students that have been on scholarship dominate overtime students. So therefore, we all know a PhD is not about money. It's about research, that's the point. But if you want to align your financial life, your personal life and your professional life, then you make sure that you know in your mind the date that scholarship ends, and you work hard and complete the research by that end date. And everything in the rest of your life will go incredibly well if you can do that. Serious problems emerge if you miss that deadline, okay? 3, research and reading. This is a powerful one. This was the one I enjoyed researching the most, and I've done a lot of work on it. So you're in a PhD. How do you know you've read enough? How do you know you've researched enough? Now, this is a big one. How do you know to stop reading? Okay, for me, there are 2 characteristics. what happens is you're doing your reading, and this is for all research, by the way, not just your PhD, and you're doing your research and your reading, and you start to come across the same authors, the same concepts, the same tropes over and over again. So by the time you've done that and you're doing the sweep of all these big issues and you come across these names and these tropes and these concepts for the third time, then you're pretty well good to go. If you're reading and you're still finding out new stuff, so you really go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. If you're finding new material and original ideas that you haven't come across before, then keep reading. But once you get to the point where you've seen it before, and then you've seen it before, and it's the third time, that's a pretty good proxy that you understand the texture of that particular research area. There's also one more tip I would give you just before you're about to submit your PhD. And this is a biggie, and all my students do it, and I do it with books all the time. And what happens is just before you submit your PhD, do a Google search as precise and as tight as you can make it with the key theorists of your area, the big ideas, the new ideas, and truncate that Google Scholar search to material in the year that you're submitting. So I'm recording this in 2019 in November. So I would be saying to my students, look for the material that's emerged in the last 6 months of 2019. So prove that you know the field, because you've done the Google searches, the Google Scholar searches for the year that you're submitting. And examiners love that. They love it because it shows that you not only know the key ideas, the big areas, that's great. You've got to show the key scholars, the key work that's been done, that's crucial, intellectual generosity, but you also know the edgy work. And examiners relax enormously when they see a lot of research cited from the year in which the thesis is submitted. So therefore, that's when you know your research has shape and texture and energy and is bounded, because you've seen the ideas before, you've got the field, and you've got the edgy stuff that's just emerged. At that point, thanks for playing, you're cooked, it's over. Right, you're finished. 4, writing and drafting. Well, we're getting into it. There is no such thing as the perfect sentence. There's no such thing as the perfect paragraph, and of course there's no such thing as the perfect PhD. But your thesis must be solidly written, and I'm using these sort of words, as blandly as I can. It has to be solidly written, and the focus has to be on strongly communicating your ideas. So what does that look like? That means your chapter structure is effective. So the chapter, the order, the structure, that works, that holds together, that's great. Secondly, there are good transitions between your chapters. So you're moving out of a chapter and into the next one. It's all very smooth. So the structure is working well. The transitions are well. Your abstract is sharp and clear. That's the first thing the examiners read. And that your introduction and your conclusion bookend the thesis beautifully. You introduce the research design and the research questions, and you answer the research design and the research questions at the end. Beautiful. That's the arc of your research. Now, do not submit a PhD with spelling and grammatical errors. Don't think they're minor. Examiners lose the will to live when we see spelling and grammatical errors, because you're demonstrating a disrespect of us, disrespect of our time. And what a lot of examiners do, and remember I read hundreds of PhD reports, what examiners do when they're really agitated, cross, they decide that they're going to list all the spelling and grammatical errors in the entire thesis. And I've certainly seen those lists go on for 12, 15 pages. So if you're worried about being humiliated in your PhD examination report, please don't put spelling and grammatical errors in, because your report will be dominated by, let me list all the spelling errors in this entire thesis. There are examiners who will do that. So the last check before you put it through Turnitin, before you submit that thesis, put a spelling checker through it. Make sure your sentences are grammatically correct, and your paragraphing enables the development of an argument. Now that's all that's required. What we want in a PhD is solid consistency in your writing. Now, when you've reached that stage, solid consistency, strong communication, it's time to submit. No one is expecting or wanting Austen or Shakespeare or E. Cummings. No one wants that. It's a PhD. Solid, consistent, grammatically correct writing that signposts your argument. That's the drill. And when you have that, you're ready to submit. The challenge, I think, emerges through the drafting process when students are emotionally invested in their prose. And that's, for example, why I use, with all my students, the 10 draft model. There's nothing magical about the number 10, trust me. I've literally just plucked that out of the air. The reason I chose 10 is that it places a template, a rational, logical, predictable template over an emotional moment in our lives. So therefore, when people are all very agitated, I go, let's just work through the drafts, let's do 10, and the point we've done 10, let it go. Let it go. So if you are feeling yourself emotionally distressed with the writing and the drafting, so for some people it's the research and the reading, for some people it's the writing and the drafting. If this is your problem, then you know what? Make a decision. I'm going to read this thing 10 times. I'm going to do 10 drafts, and then I'm going to let it go. And what that does is it takes the emotion out of the drafting and the writing. And I always say to people, I do it with my own drafting, and I draft very heavily. But I always read my own work as if it belongs to somebody else. So I print it out for the final few drafts, I print it out, put it on paper, I sit in my big beanbag and I draft it like I'm drafting somebody else's work. So that emotional disconnection allows you to be a better editor. And the final bit of advice I'm going to offer in this vlog is not qualitative, it's not quantitative, it's maybe not providing the metrics that Anna wanted. It's not a tip or a trick. But it's probably the most important one, and it's about your intellectual landscape, your vista. How do you know that you finished your PhD? 5. Have you today occupied the extremity of your knowledge, your experience, and your expertise? Now, I know Anna wanted some measures and know when you're ready to submit the thesis, and a lot of that's very easy to do. As I've said, it's about, there's the research design, have you answered the questions, have you got your original contribution to knowledge, is the structure right, is the writing pretty good, right? And all of that's great. The data sets are in place, scope and scale. If you're doing a theoretical thesis, you've really covered the conceptual and epistemological work you needed to do. That's all straightforward. But this final one is about understanding the edge of your expertise. And can I say, this is not only a technique I use in doctorates for my students, I used it on my own thesis obviously, but for other students, I use this every day to understand it's the moment to let go of that article, it's the moment to let go of that scholarly monograph, that book. Because knowledge never ends. Research never ends. Learning never ends. But research projects do end. Nothing is ever perfect. Nothing is ever a masterpiece. But you have to find a way to be satisfied, not in the perfection, but in the caliber of this work at this point in time. What I do is, after I've done all those other 4 tips we've talked about today, and I think it's over, I do something else. I do an emotional and an intellectual stock take at the end of every project. Because every project could produce 10 other tentacles, 10 other sub-themes. You could just keep going, oh, that's interesting. Every project's like that. It could just keep going forever. But there needs to be a stop. There needs to be an end. And I create that ending for myself through one question. Is this the best that I can do now? Is this the best that I can do now? And I've been trying to put in language where I try to get my feeling, or when I visualize that ending. And so it's very hard to put in language because I know what I do, and the closest I can get to it is, have I operated at the extremity, at the frontier of my knowledge at this point in my life? And I actually visualize that, to be honest with you. Is this work at the edge of what I know and the edge of what I can see? Is it my best self now? Now, those questions exist for a reason, because they allow me to forgive myself for any admissions or weird stuff I might see in this work in the future. By the way, that really happens, right? But what I'm trying to do by creating that ending is I'm giving myself permission to grow and change and improve. And I congratulate myself that, you know what, this is the best work I can produce today. And let it go. Let it go. Give yourself permission to become the next person that you're going to be in the next project and improve. So I often describe doctoral theses in books, and certainly articles as well, as scholarly photographs. So what the theses, the articles, the books do is they capture our intellectual development at a particular point. That moment that the photograph is taken, it's honest at that moment. But a minute later, an hour later, a day later, a year later, you've changed. And that's good. The photograph is honest for its moment, and it's giving you the permission to change. So recognize that this PhD is your best thinking at this point of your life, and that you will move and change and transcend and transform, and that's great. The PhD is your photograph of this research moment. Take that photograph, acknowledge it, celebrate it, and move on. That is how you finish, with rigor, with clarity, and also with a fair amount of peace. So it seems appropriate, I think, to conclude this vlog on endings with the model, the mirror, the trope that I use to understand endings in my daily life. And it comes from, not surprisingly, T.S. Eliot's 4 Quartets. As many of you know, I read Henry David Thoreau's Walden at least once a year, often on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. I find it very peaceful, reminds me what's important, gives me space. I love that as a book. But I read something different in moments of transition in my life. So when I'm thinking, right, well, I'm going to leave this job, I'm going to move to another job, I'm going to leave one country and move to another country, you know, the death of Steve. So these big moments in your life where you know everything's going to change, everything is going to be different. And there's actually just a couple of sentences from T.S. Eliot that, to be frank, have kept me alive. The best of writing does that, I think. In moments of darkness where you're wondering if you've got enough life force left, every now and again there are phrases and sentences that remind you to take a breath, remind you to take that next step. And I think also this phrase allows me to make peace with beginnings and endings. What we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. The end is where we start from. A PhD is great, brilliant, a fine achievement, but it is the first achievement in your lifetime of achievements. So enjoy that ending of the PhD, knowing that it's the beginning of something else, and revel and relish in that new beginning. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.